Good morning to you, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this month's Smart Procurement World webinar. As usual, it's a pleasure to be with you. My name is Media Simudekwa. I'm representing Smart Procurement World. Each month, I look forward to these webinars, and thank you very much for supporting us once again. But I just wanted to do something very, very quickly because the theme of this webinar is fascinating. I was looking at it and it's highlighting procurement strategies for a never normal world. But maybe that's too ambitious. So I just wanted to hear from you, maybe by just show of a thumbs up, you know how if you go under their reactions there, and then just give me a thumbs up. How many of you actually think that things will go back to normal? There is 1, 2. Okay, so we actually have quite a few people that believe that things are going to go back to normal. But then the question comes up, what needs to happen? I mean, the vaccination programs have been accelerated now, and everyone who wants to get a vaccine, I'm sure by now have actually received a vaccine. So the question now is, how do we build resilience from here? How do we prepare ourselves for this never normal world? Because believe it or not, or like it or not, things are just not gonna be the same way as they are. So there are 3 phases to this. There is before COVID, and then there is during COVID, and then there is post-COVID life now. That is what we are preparing. So what capacity tools do we need to recover quickly, to get ourselves back up quickly? And what should CPOs know now in order to prepare for this never normal world? So ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me now to introduce our international speaker. His name is Rahul Davarakonda. He's visiting us all the way. He's based in the USA, but he's actually now in Belgium at the moment. So it's good for him because the time zones are pretty much the same. And Rahul is a veteran when it comes to procurement strategy implementation with 20 plus years working with Fortune 100 companies. So he has got experience, procurement, operations, financial management, and even product management engineering as well. So Rahul, how are you this morning?
I'm doing very well, Medise. Thank you for having me today. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you, and thank you very much for your time. So Rahul, I'm just gonna hand over to you now, and you can go straight into your discussion. But before I do that, I just wanted to encourage people, please remember that our webinars are very interactive. So what we try to do is we believe that the most value comes from question and answer and engagement, and Rahul has accepted that you'll stay around for question and answer and to engage you. So please feel free to use the chat button. I know some of you usually send me questions directly because we are a community like that, but it will be good if you use the chat button and then just send through your chat questions there. And then after the presentation, we will make sure we address each and every question. If you don't necessarily have anything to say at that moment, please just keep your mic on mute. Otherwise, it can be disruptive. And obviously, if your bandwidth is a little bit low, just try to switch off your video. It always helps. So thank you very much once again. We look forward to this webinar, and over to you, Rahul.
Thank you, Medise. Once again, I appreciate having me on this call today. Would Erica or somebody else be running the presentation for us, or should I bring that up on my screen? If you could clarify that. Oh, there it is. Perfect. All right. Everybody who's on the call today, thank you for taking the time and participating in this conversation. I call this a conversation because procurement, operations, finance, everybody are facing a new challenge for the last 12 to 18 months. And that challenge is predominantly on supply chain and how we can keep our business running with the products and the services that we need to deliver to our client. Before we dive into the details, I've kind of used it to refine what the never new normal would mean from a sourcing, procurement, and a supply chain perspective. And as you can see on the slide that I have curated, it's the COVID impact on supply chain and tail spend management. Does that demand or does that need for us as procurement practitioners to reconsider or relook at it? A quick background about myself. I've been in this business world for a little over 22, 23 years now. I've started off my career at GE, General Electric, for a period of over a decade. And then I moved to a telecom business within the US as head of procurement, managing direct and indirect spend for about 5.5, 6 years. And then I've partnered with a market intelligence company, which again serves the procurement fraternity, built a product business out of that for over 5 years. And today I lead the global COO position for GIS International, which is why I'm in this beautiful city called Ghent in Belgium. It's a global company in 20 different countries. I'm based out of US, but I'm taking this meeting from Ghent today. So that's a quick background about myself. So we'll jump straight into the details. If you could go to the next slide, please. What did COVID do to us? Now, everybody are talking about chipset shortage. We don't have chips. The consumer product business has consumed a lot. There's a significant demand. As a matter of fact, I was in the market looking for the new MacBook, and the lead times are 4 to 6 weeks from the time I place an order. Now, what is that doing from a computer industry, from a consumer industry is well known. But the reality is it's not just stopping there. It's not just semiconductors that are being impacted. We have commodities starting from steel to cotton that have become significantly inflated because of the availability of raw material and the manufacturing capability that's coming through. Some numbers that I've used from Barrow, which is a market intelligence company who works with different other organizations, and their analysis has shown that over 500 commodities have witnessed over 10% increase in price. And the global freight industry has significantly been impacted, primarily because of availability of how many goods can be sent across. So there's an inflation on price there. And then if you look at the niche market on about 60 plus commodities, that their price has gone up with 50%. Now, for every person who's in the business of buying, which is procurement, supply chain, sourcing professionals, this is the worst nightmare for them. One, product availability is short, so we don't have enough products for us to be able to go buy and put it in our overall manufacturing aspect of it. And then the second is prices going up. So procurement has always been looked at as a bottom line contributor who's able to drive better pricing, better engagement with suppliers. Now, in situations like this, it does not help. Now, what does this mean? The next slide, please. Then now, if you look at the entire aspect of price increase, inflation, the bigger question now is, what is our contingency plan? As a procurement professional, sourcing professional, supply chain professional, what can we do to ensure that there is continuity of business? Medicine and I were talking about this, from a relevance perspective. Procurement's role going forward is not just going to be on price. The primary focus is going to be shifted towards availability, and which is what we're going to see in throughout this conversation. So if we could go to the next slide, we're going to start talking about what are the key elements that are impacting supply chain today. again, in relevance with what's happening with COVID and the pandemic situation, the inventory has always been considered to be a lean, right? So we use the JIT principle where we say on time inventory is required. We don't have to stock more. We always need to just get it in time. There is enough and more providers in the market. The suppliers, the manufacturers have products available on the shelf. So just give them a call. Within 2 to 4 days, it will get delivered. That needs to be rethought about because everybody is going behind the same inventory that we all need. That means the cost of inventory is going to be a significant consideration while the price of the product is already high. The second element of it, which most procurement people, supply chain practitioners and leaders would relate, if you walk into a CFO's office, the first thing that they're going to ask is, what's the return on investment that we're going to be able to make? So getting inventory is one aspect of it. Now justifying how that's going to impact the margins of the organization as you hold inventory needs to be considered. So optimization and just in time with existing manufacturing lead times definitely becomes a very challenging aspect for us to be able to consider. And then two is how fast does your inventory turn happens? What's the cycle time of the inventory so you can drive better margins from an end product perspective? So those are the key areas from that you need to be, which I'm sure you're already aware of and you're working on it, over and above the price and the inflation that's happening within the market. If you kind of go through that next slide, and we will start to look at breakdown. I've again used some of the stats because there's this famous saying, in God we trust, everybody else bring data. So I figured I'd put some of the numbers for us to be able to understand and relate to the impact of what pandemic COVID-19 has done for us and what it's going to have as an impact. The key takeaway from this slide is inventory as a percentage of revenue needs to be considered. As a matter of fact, between driving cost savings and not having product in your warehouse for your company to leverage, product availability takes significantly higher priority than anything else. Normal lead times are of the past. If you're looking at supply chain, irrespective of the semiconductors or cotton or steel or any of those aspects, normal lead times which you were experienced in 2018, 2019 are no longer a reality. And the unfortunate reality for that is 2022 does not look to be any different. We are expecting, based on all the market research and the analysis that we're seeing and the conversations that we've been having with thousands of suppliers from global market, is 2023, mid of 2023 could probably be a good time for things to stabilize. So the key message is inventory as a percentage of revenue will go up. You are going to stack up a lot more inventory. So you need to take that into your price consideration. Now let's look at another angle beyond inventory from a percentage of revenue. We'll look at the gross margins or the gross margins as a return on investment. The next slide talks about how we can look at those numbers. So if you look at the GMROO, what it explains is if you're going to have profitability as a key measure of success or a return on investment as a key measure of success, again, it drives to a direct correlation that the inventory across various companies continues to go up, which means the profitability needs to take into consideration how to better manage. The very next slide we're going to look at is working capital. So if you go to the next slide, which is connecting to all those elements, is how can you look at the cost that's going up? If you look at metals and minerals, 25.4% has been a price increase as we have seen. Agro commodities, about 10, 11%. Chemicals have gone up by 2 digits, around 20%. Packaging, which is an essential aspect of your entire supply chain, that has gone up. Logistics and transportation has gone up. So as you can see, product price, if you kind of do a cost structure analysis, if you kind of look at what is in the cost when a supplier comes to you with a price, freight, logistics, packaging are key components. All of those have gone up by 2 digits. The price of the raw material has gone up significantly. So all of this is impacting your cost of purchase, and the lack of availability of products would also increase your inventory cost. So logistics, supply chain, cost of products, and inflation of the actual product are all becoming a major challenge in what we are dealing with. Is called the new normal that we are going to be facing for the next 2 years. Now let's take a look at the next slide. Talks about what is the future ahead. One of the questions that I get asked, or we discuss rather quite often is procurement and a function or a department that will cease to exist? If all the leaders from procurement space, if you remember those conversations that the big four consulting companies had back in 2018, 2017, and also some part of 2019, where they said procurement can now be a platform. Procurement can now be digitized. There was a digital transformation, procurement transformation. What this pandemic has done is, while all of those are key considerations, we should absolutely consider digital transformation in our procurement organizations. We should absolutely leverage technology to be able to drive it. But there is the element of a strategic function of procurement that continues to play a very crucial role for organizations to exist through this pandemic and beyond. Supply shortages needs to be considered. There are different technology solutions. I've captured a few for us to look at. Budgeting and cost estimates needs to be considered, taking into cost of inventory, cost of capital needs to be considered. Our understanding, based on the conversations with various consulting aspects, various CPOs that we keep talking to, is procurement, more so within the supply chain aspect of it, is going to be a very, very critical aspect for continuous success of companies. The next slide talks about what are some of the companies doing. Now, we all know that we have a problem. We have just taken a look at how we can look at this problem differently. What are the elements that we should consider so we can have a holistic view on the overall situation of supply chain, product availability, and supply continuity. Now, let's take a look at what are some of the other companies doing. In our discussions, we work with a large, medium, and small companies across various industries. Starting with automotive to CPG to manufacturing and MRO space. We take a look at all of those. Some of these companies have broken this down into, I would say, 3 large buckets. Identify what is non-strategic. So anything which is not strategic, anything that you're not going to lose your sleep on, work as part of your tail spend consolidation. So leverage technology platforms which can give you, I call it as an Amazonization of purchasing. Leverage those platforms, give access to your buyers, self-enable them, give them the opportunity to purchase what they want to keep their business. As a procurement function, you can partner with this technology platforms that can help you manage tail spend through e-catalog, through digital RFQ process, making sure the P2P and S2P are well tackled. Organizations who are providing those services are definitely expanding on their partner relationships. So the customer comes to this digital platform, a web shop, an e-catalog for them to enable their business users to buy what they want. And then the providers of those platforms are expanding and reaching out with global suppliers to get as many SKUs, as many products onto these platforms as possible. The market study has shown that if you have about 2 to 3.5 million of SKUs, depending on what industries you're dealing with, that will definitely give about 80 to 85% coverage in what you typically buy as a business within the tail spend management. Now that takes care of your tail spend, which is the non-strategic part. Then you have the strategic aspect of it, which are components that are critical for you to keep doing what you're going to do as a business. And that's where some of these companies are considering vendor managed inventory. They're also looking at integrated supply chain for them to keep the production running. One of the worst nightmares for any company is having a production stoppage because of lack of material that goes into their product manufacturing. And that's where a VMI, a vendor managed inventory, or an integrated supply chain partnerships that you could have with some of those providers could keep you going in this uncertain conditions. My final submission before we take some of the questions, dive into the details, is supply chain is an integral part of the entire procurement strategy. It is important for you to demarcate your tail spend. It's important for you to demarcate what you want to hold as inventory, and then figure out the working capital associated with it, the lead times associated with companies, and work in a strategic fashion while you can ensure the product is accessible and while managing the inventory cost and the capital associated with it. So that's a quick, I had some time to put these thoughts together. This is a topic that we can talk all day, but I want to be respectful of the time that we have blocked. I'm almost close to the 30-minute mark. We can take some of these questions. I'm sure there will be opportunities for us to connect again. Here's my contact details. Happy to take any questions. Would love to engage in a conversation to understand and learn how you are dealing with in this pandemic situation. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Medici. So happy to take any questions that we might have.
Thank you very much, Rahul. We really appreciate that very crisp approach to these issues. You just made me think, because there's actually a question in the chat that talks about how can procurement maintain profitability, because now prices, you mentioned it in the beginning about chips, and in the computer world, everything is just going up and up and up. And we sort of seeing the role of the CPO changing, right? From just a buyer to a strategic person, and you also mentioned this. And I believe that part of their role now is to help the organization to maintain profitability. Now, here is a question: how can procurement help maintain profitability if things are this unstable, supply is scarce, and prices are up? What are you generally observing?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's a very thought-provocative question. I call this as, what value can procurement bring to the table in this situations of price increase, supply shortage, supply chain related issues? Ultimately, that's what we all look at. What value can I bring to the table as a department or a contributor within the company? I look at this as two sides to the coin.
Yeah.
Profitability is an absolute conversation we should have if we are making a product. To make a product, you need the raw material, you need to make sure your supply chain is intact. What we have seen in our conversations with large companies globally, both, we work with a lot of companies in South Africa as well. We work with companies in North America, United States, Canada predominantly, and then the European part. The focus is more on, let's put food on the table first. Let's get the raw material, let's get the supply chain intact first. If we don't have it, loss or profit doesn't even come into play. That said, profitability should always be on top of your mind. So holding inventory in-house versus vendor-managed inventory, that could make a critical differentiation on your working capital. So let's take a quick example. Let's say if I was a phone manufacturer, that's somebody that we work with, but I can't name them. But let's say if you're a phone manufacturer, and if you're holding those screens that go into your phone, and let's say that is costing you $30 to $40 million. You're going to go ahead and procure it. You want to hold the inventory so that you have that availability given the uncertain circumstances. You can use that $30 to $40 million in two ways. Either you can put it on your books and block your working capital, or you can engage with companies who can offer that services through a vendor managed inventory and integrated supply. So that capital that gets freed up can help you make more products, and the more products that you can make, the more revenue you can generate and more profitability you can generate. So instead of procurement being looked at as beating the supplier down just on price, now procurement has a great opportunity to have a strategic seat at the table at a board level and say, we can help manage the total cost of manufacturing, and as compared to here's a supplier fee that we're going to reduce.
Yeah. So let's talk about that then, because I was talking to one of these CPOs, very close colleague of mine. So he said to me, listen, the environment is just too tight at the moment. My CFO has asked me twice already to go to the same supplier to negotiate and renegotiate and so forth. How do you do that without being guilty of, you know, supplier bullying? I mean, just give me a sense of it, because beginning of the year, you are told to go back, renegotiate this. 3 months later, go back and renegotiate. Is this fair on a supplier? You know, are we focusing more on negotiating the supplier, beating them down? How do you do that without being guilty of supplier bullying? Just give me a sense.
You know, you should appreciate the person who brought this thought to you, because it automatically tells us that he or she are thinking more at a win-win partnership as compared to a win-lose partnership. So, you know, my applause to the person who brought this question to your table. Now, let's look at what the market conditions are. There are suppliers who are making products that goes into your product, or there are suppliers who provide services that go into your product. Mm-hmm. The way to look at it, and at least that's what we've been working with a lot of suppliers. We work with about 55,000 suppliers globally today. And when we go to a supplier, not two suppliers are ever in the same condition. For example, if you go to a supplier, let's say if they're making the earthing cables, the copper cables that connect the machine with the earth, we buy a lot of those for a customer of ours. And for them, they said, for me, cash is more critical than percentage of profit. So as a procurement organization, you can go to them and have a conversation and say, what's more important? Do you want to make more profit? Do you want to have early cash? Can I help you in manufacturing it? Can I co-invest in you? It depends on the supplier situation. And if you can help them out by putting cash on the table ahead, they can use that for the manufacturing process, which means they're not borrowing that in a short-term debt, which again attracts additional interest that can drive better partnerships. So I don't think there's anything to feel guilty about. I think it's more so to say, listen, this is what I want. You tell me what you want. And if you can go behind a conversation, you will always find opportunities to make it work.
Yes, there's a great question in the chat, but I just wanted to exhaust this first. So how do you co-innovate then with suppliers? You know, do you see a lot of them coming to the table to say, all right, let's work together, we can co-innovate here. There is leakage in this supply chain and we're losing money here. So let's try 1, 2, 3. Do you see that common, happening frequently?
That's a great question again. I'm going to give you an example by limiting some of the information here. Sheet metals. We're all familiar what a sheet metal is. There are a lot of companies who make a lot of sheet metal. There are the big ones like the Tatas and the Jindals who make a lot of sheet metal globally, and then they export it across the world. We do a business with a customer in Poland, in Katowice, and they buy a lot of sheet metal. And we were purchasing it from different parts of Europe, getting it from the global markets as well. Co-innovation is we had a supplier who was local in Poland, which means I don't have to worry about freight, I don't have to worry about lead times. And sheet metal is usually heavy and it takes a lot of freight space, and especially given how expensive the freight is and how backlogged it is.
Yeah.
We went to those local providers and we said, we will pay for tooling, we will co-invest with you, and can you make this sheet metal for us? They know how to handle material. They know how to get the raw material. They didn't have the funds and the business on hand to invest in tooling, where we invested with them in tooling so they can now make sheet metals locally in Poland, which means now my lead times have reduced to 2 weeks as compared to 2.5, 3 months coming in from different parts of the world.
Wow.
So those are ways for us to be able to look at and see how we can drive. I just call it as out of the box thinking. And as long as you're able to look at it, I think there are opportunities for us to consider.
Great stuff. So let's talk about VMI, vendor managed inventory. And the question here is, what are the key KPIs that we should consider as a success criteria when considering VMI or integrated supply?
That's a great question. Whoever asked, I'm sure, is related to supply chain, managing a lot of logistics and warehousing. If you look at KPIs, when you work with any partner, when you're looking at vendor managed inventory or integrated supply, there are a few things that you want to consider. What part of the business, if you look at your procurement strategy, you'll have Class A, Class B, Class C components. Class A are you buy only a few of those, and they are very expensive and they're very strategic. Then you have the Class B, which is in the mid space, and then the Class C, where you spend a lot of time procuring it, but the value of it is limited. So let's take, without again naming the company, we'll take a train. If you look at a train, approximately 10 to 11,000 parts go in a train, and it costs about 1.3 to 1.5 million euros to make a train. Class A, Class B, and Class C components, if you break it down to those 10,000, 11,000 parts, 7 to 9,000 parts are Class C. And the total spend to procure those 7 to 9,000 parts out of 11,000 is 100,000. So on a 1.3, 1.4 million total train, only 100,000 euros goes into purchasing those Class C components, but those Class C components are 80% of your total components that you're purchasing. When you look at VMI, I think it's very important for you to say, how big is my procurement team and where do I want them to focus? If your procurement team can focus on the 1.2 million that you're spending and take this 100,000, which is majority of transactional volume, give it to a tail spend management company who can do VMI, that's the first condition that you should look at. What am I really considering to outsource? The second element of it is proximity. KPI for supply chain is on-time delivery in full. So if somebody has an integrated supply service, let's say if they're in, if your client is in Katowice in Poland, and if you have a warehouse in Ghent, Belgium, probably not the smartest way to do it because it's going to take a long time for you to replenish the bins. So bin management in an integrated supply is a critical component. So proximity to the manufacturing plant assembly line is a good condition for you to look at, again, reducing the lead time for bin replenishment. And then the third most important element is their category management experience while buying those products. The funny thing about this Class C components is they're nuts and the bolts and whatnot, but even they could be out of stock. So identifying, if you work with a company who has a primary supplier 1, 2, and 3, then they already know that they will never put all eggs in one basket. So a matured integrated supply provider or a VMI provider will have strong category management, and they will be able to de-risk the procurement strategy by not putting all eggs in one basket. So they work with a lot of suppliers to make sure they continue to stay. So those are some of the, on a high level, things that I would start with considering a VMI or an integrated supply provider.
Yeah. And we could go on really, but thank you very much. Now let's talk about some of the pain points of COVID, right? It's either you are out of cash or out of supply. That's how where it boils down to really. How do you dig yourself out of the hole through perhaps, you mentioned in your presentation, strategic partnerships and so forth, and your example in Poland was very apt, and I appreciate that. But I'm talking more on the organization level where, all right, we are out of cash or we are out of supply. What other initiatives can a CPO bring to the table to say, guys, these are some of the options we could explore right now in order to just dig ourselves out of the hole? Because everyone is in survival mode, right? So the traditional role of a CPO is changing, organizations are restructuring and so forth. What are some of the partnerships that CPOs can look into in order to just, help their organizations out of this mess?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that every CPO, every procurement leader today working in different positions, the only thing that's keeping them up in the night is how can we keep our continuity going while there are products, while not blowing up on the wallet. So that's a very relevant question. I think there are different approaches towards it. One approach could be consignment shipment. So you know what you want, you already place an order with somebody, you tell them that don't send it to me, but I will consume that inventory or that consignment in 3 to 6 months. So you're giving assurance to a supplier of yours so they can boldly go and procure the raw material to make the product for you. Supply chain and manufacturing have one thing in common. It's volume and commitment. So if you can express the commitment and give them a forecast, a better forecast or a robust forecast and how much volume you can consume, it will be a breath of fresh air for the supplier, because then they know that here's a confirmed business that they're going to earn, which means they would go ahead and procure material at larger volume or start placing the orders with their suppliers or the tier 2 suppliers, if I may. So consignment shipment is definitely something you want to consider. The second aspect of it is free up your procurement core team's bandwidth. I cannot stress enough, there's an organization which is a large CPG company in the US. Their procurement team is 800 people.
Wow.
Now, why do they need 800 people? Because they wanted to manage everything by themselves. They want, even if you were buying pens, so there was a category manager for office supplies. The world has changed, and I think we need to leverage technology. You don't need 800 people to manage buying pens or buying office supplies. You can use digital catalogs, you can use technology platforms where you can go ahead and do your P2P purchasing without necessarily burning your human capital in your organization. So the procurement organization can look at it and say, how can I do more for less? I'm not saying the 800 people should be let go. All I'm saying is let them focus on strategic products. Let them focus on spending time visiting the supplier locations, understanding what the supplier pain points are, working in a true collaborative aspect, then focusing on transactional business.
Interesting. Good. That was really good, Rahul. Now, I wanted to ask you this because, I find a lot of CPOs at the moment, going through restructuring. I know 3, for example, right now, who said to me, hey, don't contact me in the next 3 months because we are restructuring, But what contribution can procurement actually make? You called up in a restructuring meeting, we are going to be restructuring. What should procurement be thinking about? What is your contribution in there? Is it just to say, all right, I'm going to manage your suppliers, or, what is the contribution that procurement can make?
In my humble opinion, in my 23 years of my career, there are days that I've used or probably abused the word strategic meetings a lot more than what it should be. When I don't know what to tell you, I'll say, I'm sorry, I'm in a strategic review on the entire process. Let me come back to you. And that's a fact. But what's more important is, if we are reaching out to any procurement organization, if we're reaching out to any supply chain organization, if we can tell them what we can do for them, I think we'll be able to grab their attention. I think, if you look at anybody, procurement, every customer is a supplier for somebody. And that's the circle of life. We are all selling to somebody at any given point in time. So if I look at my engagement back in a telecom business as a CPO, I was a CPO for my supplier. I'm a customer for my supplier, but I was the supplier to my customer who is eventually using the telecom services. So if we can go and look at procurement organizations and understand what is their number one criteria, depending on what industry they're in, what region they're in, what are they making? Are they a direct or an indirect manufacturer? If you can figure that out and provide a direct solution saying, this is what I can do in short term, that will help. The second element of it is, I think procurement should also keep their ear on the ground. When things get harder, innovation kicks in. If we have enough food on the table, I don't think we'll innovate to figure out how we can optimize, because there's so much food on the table. When your resources get limited, innovation kicks in. There are so many companies these days that have come up with some brilliant ideas, great ideas for you to be able to look at and capture their value. So spending maybe 20 to 25% on strategic thinking is a very good idea, but we also need to make sure that we have a good understanding on what's happening in the market. So it's a collaborative effort. Not every call you get is going to be a magic wand that can solve the problem. But if you don't take that call, you may not know which one could potentially be of use as well.
Yes. So now, can procurement contribute towards revenue generation? It's a tricky one, right? Because procurement is spending. All right. I've placed this order, now I'm spending. Can the process be reversed somewhat, and actually contribute to the organization's bottom line?
It's a fascinating question, and I'll tell you why. We are in active conversations with a large company who is in the mobility space, and they want to club their sales and sourcing organization together. At least in my past history, I've never heard that. Getting a sales organization work as a consolidated team with the procurement organization. And the reason that we're working with them on that initiative is, you can't sell what you don't have. and you don't have if there is no supply chain and if there is no procurement integration or collaboration with it. So can procurement contribute towards the revenue? I think the better answer is if procurement does not deliver value, there's nothing for you to sell, which means there's no revenue that's going to come through to the table. So my answer is, I think it's a collab. It's partners in crime. I call sales and procurement and partners in crime. If they can collaborate, if sales can give them a better forecast, and this is something that we all agree. Sales also has their challenges. They can't give you an accurate forecast on how much they can sell. But if they can work in tandem with procurement, create a good sales forecast, work in collaboration with procurement, so procurement can then go to the market and get the products and services that you need to deliver to your end customer. So I would say yes. The answer is, can procurement contributes to the revenue? I don't think there's another way to look at it. If there's no product to sell, I don't think sales has much to sell anyways.
That's a good one. So you touched on something that I was going to ask you anyway, if procurement is not generating value. And this has been a very big discussion for us in the last 3 or so years, because what is value? What constitutes value? We have heard this so many times. Procurement should, generate value, create value, value add. But what is it really? What's your opinion? How would you sum up value from a procurement perspective?
I would say, and again, making a bold statement, please bear with me. Value depends on the day of the week. If you walk into a CEO's office, and let's say you have enough product on the shelf, you have enough inventory, he's going to look at procurement and say, what value are you delivering? There's absolutely no cost out. Go get me cost out. Yeah. Because there's raw material, there's supply chain, there's inventory, everything is in place. The next day, let's say you're running out, and again, I'll talk about a telecom example. Yeah. They were running out of fiber optic cable. And the CEO's office, the next time they meet, is like, forget about savings. Who cares about savings? Go get me my cable. Even if you need to go spend double the money, get me the cable. Wow. Procurement, again, as a procurement practitioner, I'm sure my fellow friends and fraternity would agree, sometimes procurement is treated as a doormat. If you got everything, then you're not delivering value. If you don't have it, forget about price, go get me the product. Our value to the organization needs to be with a very clear vision that on time in full. And I've believed it in all my life. It could be a product or a service. If your end customer needs something, then your internal stakeholders need to be able to deliver that, which means if procurement can get your internal customers anything that they ask on time in full, that's the first objective. The second objective is then balance it out with ROI, return on investment, cost benefit analysis. Yeah. So I have always looked at, even in the customers that we work with from an integrated supplier, vendor managed inventory or tail spend, we always prioritize one thing, on time in full. If that's not there, you could save 20%, but nobody is going to give you a pat on the back because that 20% doesn't really mean much.
Wow, interesting stuff. So now I'm sitting with CPOs who are saying to us, you know what, we have been given this target, 10-15% savings year on year for the next 7 years and so forth. Is it just down then to cost savings?
Yeah, I think the market is definitely evolving. When I started back in late 1990, 1999, 1998, procurement was more as a buy function. The only thing that they gave procurement people were boxing gloves, and they said, go beat the supplier. Since then, now I think procurement does have a very strategic seat at the table. I'm privileged to talk to a lot of CPOs across the globe in various companies with different industries. Procurement is now reporting either directly to the CEO or the COO functions in many organizations. They're no longer just sitting under a CFO function. The reason they're being moved out of the CFO function more into direct line with the COO or the CEO is they want to be able to look at and say, one, are you a trusted advisor? Which means let's say there is vice president for networks, taking a telecom example. If the VP networks is having a sleepless night because a network is down, which means there is a supplier who's providing services to bring it up, which means the CPO is having a sleepless night. So that's the connectivity that they're bringing in and saying, I'm serving my internal stakeholders, which means I'm part of the CEO's organization, not necessarily just a bean counter or somebody who just brings the price down. I think that transformation is happening significantly. And if it's not happening enough, then I think we as thought leaders, we as change catalysts needs to introduce the concept and say price is one element of it, but it's all about value and what value we can bring to the table.
That's a good one. It's really about that contribution. So you did that well. Now tell me, as we wrap up now, what are some of your parting words? Where should procurement be, in your opinion, and where are we? And it comes down to Renee's question as well around KPIs. What should procurement be focusing on right now? Where do you think we are, and where do you think we should be?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. I'm gonna start with saying we need to keep our head above water. That's priority number one, which means expand the portfolio and understand what's happening in the global markets.
Yeah.
Sometimes you might be surprised that the products and the services that you need or where you were purchasing it from may not be available, but there are global markets who can deliver the same products and services for you to consider. So that's number one. Number two is, as one of my slides said, and you're welcome to share this with the participants, if you look forward, if you look ahead, take the total cost of ownership into consideration, which includes your freight cost, inventory cost, and also working capital. That's where I think procurement can have a seat next to the CFO as compared to being part of the CFO's vertical, where they can go to the CFO and say, what's the working capital requirements for our company? And have that strategic conversation with them and see how much of that working capital can be freed up. That could be a huge benefit for a large organizations or smaller medium organizations, definitely for the small ones, but you might be surprised how critical working capital could be for the large organizations as well. So that's a second aspect. The third aspect of it is human capital that you have is very scarce, and treat them like gold, which means if you have a 10-member procurement organization, I usually treat them like gold so that I then use them where I need them and not just put them on every task or every activity that is required. So definitely leverage technology platforms as compared to the human capital. So the people that you have can work on more strategic aspects and could have a larger impact for the organization. So those would be my 2 cents. Now, I'm sure there are a lot of people with a lot of better thoughts. Hopefully you'll capture that as a feedback from this session, and I'm very eager to learn from everybody that they're working on various challenges within their own companies.
Rahul, it was a pleasure to be with you today. Please just put again your email address in the chat box, but we really appreciate your insights. If really I can sum this whole conversation up, it's really about expanding your horizon, right? CPOs should build back better. It's about creating profitability. It's about building strategic partners, free up working capital, leverage technology, treat your human capital like gold. I think that's did I miss something else? But I think those were the main points. I really appreciate those insights. I wish we could have more questions, but I think we had a very good discussion. Thank you very much once again for your time, Raul, and dedication. I know you travel a lot, and I know right now you right. There's another question. I did not start from the beginning, but anyway, it's just thank you. All right. But thank you very much, Rahul. We really appreciate. Thanks for your time once again. And ladies and gentlemen, these are the kind of webinars that we have. The value is in this engagement, and Rahul did well to respond to all the questions that we had. So thank you very much. We appreciate that. So our next series is not actually going to be webinars. Webinars will come, but more structured, will give you more and more notice. But we are going to run more flash talks now as breaking news happens in South Africa, globally, and so forth. We're going to keep track of that and give you insights on demand with industry leaders that can be available to share insights as Rahul has done. But we'll communicate those as time goes on. And until next time, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Rahul, once again for your time. It was a pleasure to be with you.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you for having me. Have a good day, everybody.
You too.